I want to introduce to you someone that I work with every day. Not a colleague at the university, but a poet. He was born in Paris in 1821 and is now known as one of the most famous French writers of all time. His name is Charles-Pierre Baudelaire. Baudelaire's childhood was not easy. His father died when he was 6 years old, and he was raised by his mother and his stepfather. The France in which Baudelaire grew up was as unstable as his family life. In July 1830, when Baudelaire was 9 years old, there was a revolution with 3 brutal days of fighting in Paris. This was the first of 2 revolutions which Baudelaire was to experience before he was even 30 years old. In 1839, Baudelaire was expelled from school for refusing to declare a note which had been passed to him during a lesson. So if you think teachers nowadays are strict, and I know, I was one, you should see what it would be like to be in Paris in the 19th century at school. But Baudelaire did make it to graduation, and he attended the École de Droit, the law school in Paris. And like many students, when they get their hands on that precious loan, Baudelaire was not too good at managing his money. His social life and his taste for women, alcohol and drugs were expensive. He spent much of his time hanging out with writers, and it was in those days that Baudelaire began to write poetry. In 1857, he published his first collection of poetry, Les Fleurs du Mal, Flowers of Evil, consisting of 100 poems. However, some of the themes in Baudelaire's poetry created a scandal, talking about vampires and lesbians, which in the mid-19th century was considered to be taboo. So Baudelaire was put on trial, and the judges declared that 6 poems were offensive and indecent, and they were censored. This did not put Baudelaire off writing poetry. After all, there's no such thing as bad publicity. He published a second edition of Les Fleurs du Mal with 30 new poems in 1861. He also wrote prose poetry, published in collected form in 1868, a year after his death. So let's take a look at a poem by Baudelaire to get a sense of what his poetry is really like. This poem is called La Cloche Filée, or the Broken Bell, and I'm going to read it to you in translation in a minute so you can get a sense of it. And as I'm reading, I want you to think about the themes which are in there. What emotions does it conjure up? How do you think that speaker is feeling? It is bitter and sweet during winter nights to listen near the fire which crackles and smokes, to the distant memories slowly rising at the noise of chimes singing in the fog. Happy is the bell with the vigorous throat, which, despite its age, alert and strong, faithfully sends forth its religious cry like an old soldier standing sentinel under the tent. My soul is cracked, and when in its boredom it wishes to fill the cold air of night with its songs, it often comes about that its weakened voice resembles the thick rattle of a wounded man forgotten on the edge of a lake of blood under a great pile of the dead, and who dies without moving after tremendous efforts. So what words and emotions spring to mind as you read the poem? I'm asking you, come on, I want some reaction from you here.
Quite dark.
It is quite dark, isn't it? Anything else which we think the speaker might be feeling? Certainly not happy, no. Well, I came up with a list of some of the feelings and emotions which come up in this poem, but there are many more. And one thing we notice actually is that noise comes up a lot. It's a very noisy poem. We've got singing, we've got bells, we've got all the sounds of the city. So these are just some of the themes that we come up with. So, although many people still read Baudelaire's poetry, we encounter Baudelaire a lot actually nowadays through music. Lots of British and American composers and singers have used Baudelaire's poetry as words for their songs. I work as research associate on the Baudelaire Song Project, which means it's my job to find out all those song settings of Baudelaire's poetry. And we found Baudelaire in some really weird places. The variety of song settings we found has been huge, from pop and rock to rap and black metal. It's not just French and English singers who like Baudelaire either. His poetry has been set to music in Russian, German, Norwegian, Spanish, Polish, Korean and Hebrew. And although building a database of the song settings of Baudelaire's poetry is a huge part of the Baudelaire Song Project's research, this is only the beginning of what we do. Part of my job is to look at patterns in who is reading and singing Baudelaire. But really importantly, I use computer software to look at music in order to find new ways of reading poetry that was published nearly 150 years ago. But I want to show you the really exciting part of my research, which is the songs. So I'm going to be asking you to give me some ideas again here, and we're going to listen to a very short song, and it's by a composer called Louis Vierne. It's in French, and it was composed in 1919. So as you're listening, try and think of some of the words which you would use to describe this song. So we got a little bit of a sense there of what Louis Vierne interpreted in Baudelaire's poem. Now I'm going to play you another song. This time it's by a band from Leicester called Overgrown, and it was released in 2013. And now we've got the volume up, you might want to just be prepared for this one. So, any words to describe that one? Same poem. Sorry? Ominous, yeah, it's extremely ominous, and that's, I think, in Baudelaire's poem as well. Any other words to describe that? Menacing. Menacing, extremely menacing. Anything else that we've got? I found angry in that one. Had a word there, I think. So it is really kind of enraged. So what can we learn from the difference between these two songs and the comparison? Well, the first thing we can tell is that Baudelaire is being read and listened to by musicians and their audiences even in the 21st century and in different languages. But more importantly, I think we've seen that different song settings show us how other people have read Baudelaire, and they help us understand his poetry in new and interesting ways. Baudelaire's influenced lots of English-speaking pop and rock singers, from the Rolling Stones' 1968 song Sympathy for the Devil and The Cure's 1987 hit How Beautiful You Are, to PJ Harvey's song Pig Will Not, which is a setting of a poem called The Rebel, and pretty much everything that Pete Docherty has ever written, from Baby Shambles and The Libertines, he loves Baudelaire. But why are English-speaking musicians so taken with Baudelaire? Well, Baudelaire's poetry deals with themes which are familiar to all of us. When describing the broken bell, we came up with words like melancholy, sad, darkness, and who hasn't felt like this at one time or another? A team of researchers at North Carolina State University in the US found that these were the most popular themes in pop songs from 1969 to 2009. Now, they're all pretty familiar themes there, and they pop up in Baudelaire's poetry just as much as they pop up in pop music, as we've seen from the broken bell. And why do these themes come up so often? Well, the researchers at North Carolina State University show that these themes speak to people because they describe and express feelings which are familiar emotional experiences for all of us and which we try and articulate in our everyday lives. And so does Baudelaire's poetry, as we can see from all the themes that crop up in his poems in his word cloud. So I started by giving you a very brief introduction to Baudelaire's life, including some of the juicier parts. I think musicians and listeners like Baudelaire because he's a little bit rock and roll, getting into trouble at school, spending his inheritance, gaining his inspiration from alcohol and drugs, hanging out in brothels, and doing the kind of things that people like Black Sabbath and the Beatles have done. But there's more to Baudelaire than sex, scandal, and sensation. And ultimately, our research is starting to show that really, people like Baudelaire because at heart, he's quite a lot like you and me. Thank you.